And instead of debating on YouTube and, having endless discussions about stuff and who's right and who's wrong, they just said, no, we just going to get all the construction contracts. And really, they're not a minority, but they're a minority on paper. But really, in this part of the world, part of the country, they're really not a minority. But because they're minorities on paper from a government standpoint, they've been able to come into this area. And because they don't spend time trying to make sure somebody's right, somebody's wrong, let's have a 3-hour debate, they've been able to sew up a lot of the construction contracting in this H-Town area under minority contracts. And then they're using that as an economic warfare against what? Other groups. Because they got all that sold up. So you don't really see Asians in that area. You don't really see Indians, which they call Asians, in these areas. They got the Mexicans in H-Town. They got construction sold up. I mean, they got it sold up. So they're a minority contractor group. If you come to H-Town, you're pretty much going to be dealing with Mexicans, also known as Latinos. Where in the Cleveland area, you primarily was going to be dealing with black people. And they're not as effective as these people down here because coming from where they come from, they already know how to move as a group, right? They just had a bad structure to operate in Mexico. This is a better structure in America. So with their group dynamic and they group, the way in which they move as a group, it's a cakewalk for them over here because they're competing with people that don't know how to move as a group. So that means there is no competition. So that's what you got to understand. These are the resources that we're involved in economic warfare over. So if you look at the United States and Russia, the United States is trying to impact Russia through energy policy. They're trying to get everybody to stop buying Russian energy, right, and buy energy from other places because Russia drives a majority of their economic activity through their energy sales. So if we can get them to stop doing that, then what we can do is undercut their economic ability and starve that government out. We saw the United States do the same thing with Venezuela, right? Venezuela drove a lot of money through their country through what? Energy sales. The United States created sanctions against their energy market. They can't bring any more money. So now they're still selling energy through the black market. But what made Venezuela a valuable country economically was their ability to sell oil on the world market. This is going on all the time, right? People are looking to attack other people's economic situation. They're looking to build theirs up. And they're doing this over and over and over and over and over again. No real effective groups are on YouTube arguing over, right? Should women be submissive? What's wrong with people of different sexual orientations? No effective groups are fighting over that. They're presenting that to other groups to distract them, and they're worried about getting engaged in economic warfare to strengthen their group because these are the only things to really fight over. So they control media, but they're not going to be on media fighting each other. They just control the media. So that's what I want you to understand. So let's go ahead and get to this next slide. So here's a scenario, right? Company XYZ has a person working for them, and I don't like their media content, right? So company XYZ is a publicly owned company. Okay. So now what are my options? So now if I don't know any better, I think my option is to do like a petition to get this person off media. So let me do a petition. Let me get 30,000 signatures and get this person off media because I don't like their media content. Right. Or I can go on, social media and go on Twitter and just keep, going back and forth with this person, which is really raising a profile and raising a publicity because the algorithm's seeing that they're getting all this engagement. Right. Or I can just ignore it. But I realize that they're a publicly owned company. So them being a publicly owned company creates options for me. Why? Because they're publicly owned and I understand how the equities markets work. Now, if they're a privately owned company, that's an issue because why? It can be more difficult to get to them because they're operating on a private structure. And so you see a lot of this in media. A lot of the people in media that have a lot of controversial takes are operating through private structures. So they create these private media apparatuses that they have access to the internet because everybody has access to the internet now. And they make a lot of controversial statements. And there's very little you can do about that because why? They're operating through a private structure. The thing, though, is that when they try to move mainstream, they often attach themselves to publicly owned companies. And that's where you can attack them economically. So my thing is that if you want to have certain statements against my group that I don't agree with and that my group doesn't agree with, as long as you stay on the margins, that's cool. You stay out there in the wilderness, that's fine. But see, to really get big, you got to mainstream yourself. So then to mainstream yourself, what you often have to do is start attaching yourself to publicly owned situations, to media apparatuses that are publicly owned. Then now I have the ability to reach out and get you. But because we're not thinking on this level, we think the thing is to just go back and forth with these people or to raise their profile. Now, many of us just want to raise our profile. So we don't think of effective plans to get to these people. What I learned from some of my mentors is to stay cash heavy. And the reason why we stay cash heavy is because we never know when we need to make a move. Now, to stay cash heavy, what do we got to be do? We got to be making enough money to put money to the side to stay cash heavy. I don't mean an emergency fund. I mean, we put money up so that when we got to make a move, we can make a move on a situation. So we're constantly doing what we call amassing a war chest, right? Which is a big part of warfare. You're constantly amassing a war chest with the hope of we can have enough money to move that in a certain area whenever we need to, or we can have enough money to accomplish this goal in the future, right? And that's what I want people to understand. So many of these people that have derogatory things to say about a group, they operate on the fringes until they want to get big. Then once they try to get big, they now have to mainstream themselves. That's when you can get with them. So let me give an example. Y'all remember about 2 years ago when Nick Cannon had Griff on his show? And Griff and Nick Cannon made statements that a certain group didn't like. The reason why they was able to get at Nick Cannon is because he was on a show that was being put out by a publicly owned situation, right? So his particular show was being broadcast through a company that was publicly owned, right? So they can put pressure on him because, and I'm not talking about YouTube, I'm talking about his little comedy show. So Nick, because of that, had to change his whole routine. Why? Because you're not operating on the fringes. See, Griff operates on the fringes. No disrespect to Griff. Griff operates on the fringes. So Nick brought Griff into the mainstream, right? But what they told Nick was that message that Griff has, it has to stay on the fringes. You can't mainstream that message. Why? Because it's in opposition to our message. So we're never going to let you mainstream that message because it's in opposition to our message. And our message is not contestable. We don't allow people to contest our message. And then we understand how to engage in economic warfare against anybody that wants to contest our message. There will be no argument. There will be no debate. There will be no 3-hour live streams on YouTube. We understand how to engage in economic warfare against people that decide to contest our message, right? Somebody says something derogatory against our group, and we want to make 30 YouTube videos because we don't know how to engage in economic warfare against people that want to contest our message or make sure that they stay out on the fringes, right? We mainstream them by talking about them more. So there's no way in the world a person, right? So I don't know who is backing up Revolt. I don't know who backs Revolt up, right? But there's no way in the world, if I'm over Revolt, I mainstream a person that tells black people that they're on the plantation. And it tells black people that slavery is not that bad because other groups of the world have been enslaved. I would never mainstream a person like that, right? But because we're so unsophisticated in these areas, or we just clout chasing, or we just don't know no better, we mainstream people that have messages that are in opposition to our message. There's no way APAC is going to mainstream you if your message is derogatory to their message. They're not going to do it on the sake of discussion. They're not going to do it because we want opposing views. They're never going to allow the mainstream. So no way that APAC would mainstream Griff. Because why? Griff's message is in opposition to their message. So they would never allow him on their platform or at a conference or forum that they're holding to give his message out. They don't care how big. The guy can have 10 million followers on social media. Doesn't matter to them. Why? Because his message is in opposition to our message. But see, these are the kind of things we do, right? So we don't know how to engage in these particular areas. Then we promote these people even more to continue to give messaging that is in opposition to our message, right? Because we don't understand how to play this game the right way. So that's what goes on. So once I realize that this person is operating under, or they're trying to move into a publicly owned company to continue to push out their message, now we have the opportunity to get to this person because I understand how publicly owned companies are composed, right? So that's what I want you to understand. So what we're going to do is go into 3 strategies on video, and then we're going to talk about them, and we're going to get up on out of here, right? Let's go.
Presented by WallStreetSurvivor.com. Short selling is a risky way to profit from declining stock prices. Basically, it is a bet against a stock or company. When you buy a stock, you expect the price to go up. On the other hand, when you short a stock, you expect the price to go down. Shorting a stock is the inverse of buying a stock, which is often referred to as going long. Here's Jack. Jack has heard that Goliath National Bank is in financial trouble and expects their stock price to go down. In order to profit from his prediction, Jack will short GNB. But how does this work? Jack calls his broker and tells him that he wants to short 1 share of GNB. To do this, the broker needs to find 1 share to lend to Jack. The broker can look at a few different places, including his stock inventory and his clients' portfolios. If he still can't find the stock, he can ask other brokers. Jack's broker finds the share in one of his clients' portfolios and borrows it. The broker will then sell the share on the market for Jack. GNB stock was trading at $100, which will be credited to Jack's brokerage account. Jack was right. After a week, GNB's financial struggles are made public and the stock price drops to $70. Because the stock price dropped and Jack made a bet against the stock, Jack stands to make a profit by buying back or covering GNB. Jack calls his broker and tells him to cover his position in GNB. The broker uses the money from Jack's brokerage account to buy 1 share of the stock from the market at the current price of $70 and returns the stock to his client's portfolio. Jack sold GNB stock for $100 and bought it back for $70. Awesome. Jack made a profit of $30. Jack also has to pay a small fee to the broker for the right to borrow the stock. Short selling is for advanced traders because it can be extremely risky. Unlike buying a stock or going long, where your losses are limited, your losses are unlimited when you short. To explain how your losses are unlimited, consider this graph of price versus profit. Let's say you buy a stock for $100. The most you can possibly lose is the amount that you paid for it, in this case $100. As the stock price goes up, your profits will continue to go up as well. Theoretically, there is no limit to how high the price can go. Now consider that you have shorted the same stock at $100. In this case, you profit when the price decreases. The most you could stand to make is the price that you shorted at, in this case $100. However, as the price goes up, your losses go up. And since there is no limit to how high the stock price can go up, theoretically there is no limit to how much you can lose. While shorting is an effective way to make money when stock prices go down, make use of stop orders to minimize your risk. To practice short selling risk-free, sign up at Wall Street Survivor.
First, hostile takeover. And we'll use a fictitious company for this example. And that fictitious company is 3 Little Pigs Software. Okay, here we are, 3 Little Pigs. And it's a software company that's been established since the 1960s and has become very successful over the years. They've made a lot of money, and they're now actually worth about $5 million. Okay, so they've done pretty well. Still small, but does pretty well. Large number of shareholders, all of whom we see here in the shadow of 3 Little Pigs. And because they've been quite successful, they have, of course, attracted the attention of bigger players in the industry, specifically the big player, biggest player of all, MicroHog. Okay, here's MicroHog. And MicroHog says, quite fancy a little bit of a 3 Little Pigs action. They've got a nice little business there. So MicroHog's representative goes to 3 Little Pigs and says, hey, we're really interested in buying you guys. How about we pay you, $5 million and buy you guys out? And the 3 Little Pigs say no. And the MicroHog says, okay, well, how about 6 million or maybe even 7 million? 3 Little Pigs say no. We like being an independent company. We like being on our own. This kind of in this little niche. Yes, we may be public, but we like to do things our way. We don't want to become part of you. MicroHog thinks to itself, okay, well that's the friendly part done. So maybe I'm going to have to turn hostile. And what does that mean? Yes, he turns into the big bad wolf. Here's the big bad wolf, complete with teeth. The big bad wolf goes hostile. How does he do that? Well, basically he has 3 options. Okay, 3 ways of going after this company in a hostile way. The first thing is to do a tender offer. Okay. The second thing that he can do is have a proxy fight. And the third thing that he can do is have a creeping tender offer. We'll call that TO for short. Okay, so there's 3 options. All right, so how do these work? Well, the tender offer basically is an announcement by Microhog that they're prepared to pay a certain amount for 3 little pigs. So say they say, okay, we're prepared to offer $10 million, double the price. And this, what they're doing is they're making this offer over the heads of the board and making it direct to the shareholders. And the hope is that the shareholders will see this announcement and go, oh, we're going to double our money. And they'll rush across and en masse go and see the board and say, hey, at a shareholders meeting, you've got to respond to Microhog's offer. This is what we want to do. So that's the hope. The second thing they might do is proxy fight. This is where they go to the biggest of the shareholders, right? The big players here, the 3 little pigs people, not the board, of course, but the biggest, well, sometimes on the board, but the biggest shareholders. And they'll say, look, we're about to double your money here. Come on, get with it. Convince the board, or maybe they've got individual members of the board. Come on, we'll double, maybe give you a bit of a sweetener, and convince the board to actually do the deal for $10 million. So what they're doing is they're essentially, making this approach by proxy via the shareholders. And the third method is through a creeping tender offer. And that's where they go and they go into the market, into the public market, and try to buy up as many of the shares as they can at the market rate. Okay, so snap, 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 they're going to get as many of these shares in as possible. The problem with all 3 of these methods is that they're pretty visible, especially the third method. And 3 little pig software is going to know very, very quickly, whether or not they've got this hostile takeover and whether or not somebody's actually trying to get in there and get their hands on the company without the permission, or the sanction of the board. So they can actually fight a rearguard action. They can put they can put into place these problems for a hostile buying company. Like, for example, putting a poison pill in there, which gives shareholders rights that they wouldn't otherwise have, that might be difficult for the company to deal for the acquiring company to deal with. And there are all sorts of rearguard actions that they can take with all sorts of cool exotic names, like the macaroni defense and the lobster trap and killer bees and all these kind of things. But the real problem is, and obviously this is to protect 3 little pigs and make them less attractive to a buyer. But the biggest problem, if you are involved in a hostile takeover, is not necessarily these restrictions that might be put in place by the board of 3 little pigs. It's the fact that you can't get access to real information about the company. When there's a friendly takeover, if Microhog came to 3 little pigs as a friendly company, they were doing a friendly deal, Microhog would get access to all of 3 little pigs books. He'll be able to look into every single nook and cranny in every corner of the company and see how the company operated and see if there are any problems. In a hostile takeover, the only information they have access to is the information that's public. Okay, it's the stuff that's with the SEC or the stuff that's out in the newspapers. That's all they get access to. They don't get to poke around the company at all. And of course, that's a big problem, because they may buy the company, they may find out that it doesn't operate as well as they thought it did. They may in fact be buying a pig in a poke, and that's going to leave Microhog or any other acquiring company very badly needing a drink.
(14th, 2022), Elon Musk announced a cash offer to buy Twitter for $54.20 per share. This came after it had been revealed that he had acquired a 9.2% stake in the company and briefly entertained being on the company's board. Musk's stated purpose was to change the company's approach to content moderation. Musk's attempt to influence Twitter was a form of what's called activist investing. Activist investing can take many forms, but the goal is the same: to influence how a company is run. Activist investors commonly do this by becoming a major shareholder. CEOs of publicly traded companies must ultimately answer to the company's shareholders and the board of directors who represent shareholders' interests. Often, being a large shareholder allows them to appoint or take seats on the board of directors, which gives them greater access and influence with the company's leadership. Famous activist investors include Carl Icahn, Bill Ackman, Paul Singer, and so on. In the 2020s, activist investors were making headlines, like Ryan Cohen and his influence on GameStop, as well as McKellum Capital Management and Kohl's. So what do activist investors do? And do they add value or extract it? Activists invest in a company if they think they can increase shareholder value by enhancing the company's profitability, efficiency, or structure. For example, in the mid-2000s, Daniel Loeb became a major shareholder in Ligand Pharmaceuticals and wrote a famously scathing public letter accusing the CEO of mismanagement. Loeb joined the board and appointed a new CEO who quickly reduced employee headcount and moved the company headquarters from an expensive San Diego office building. Over the next 2 years, sales increased dramatically, producing $218 million in cash. By the time Loeb cashed out, he had nearly doubled his $50 million investment. Total revenue for Ligand in 2021 was $277 million, and the company had 155 employees. Sometimes activists are less disruptive, like when Carl Icahn's investment fund owned $2 billion of Apple and used his influence to convince Apple CEO Tim Cook to use its excess cash to start a share buyback program to boost the stock price.